4.7 Close project or phase, and this is the last process in project integration management. Close project or phase is the process of finalising all activities for the project, phase or contract. The key benefits of this process are that the process or phase information is archived, the planned work is completed, and organisational team resources are released to pursue other endeavours. This process is performed once or at predetermined points in the project. And that's from the PMBOK Guide, page 121. Closing a project is not just like switching a computer off. There's still a lot to be done and a lot can go wrong. The close project or phase process is another one where the project manager takes centre stage and will be checking that all the project work is completed and that the project has met its objectives, including work and objectives that were added along the way as a result of approved change requests. Just a reminder here that the type of phase mentioned here is the mini project type of phase inside a main project. The activities necessary for the administrative closure of the project or phase include actions and activities necessary to satisfy completion or exit criteria for the phase or project, such as making certain that all documents and deliverables are up to date and all issues are resolved, confirming the delivery and formal acceptance of the deliverables by the customer, ensuring that all costs are charged to the project, closing project accounts, reassigning personnel. Depending upon the organisation type, we'll be covering organisation types later in the course. The project staff will be assigned to another project, or they will return to their normal day jobs, or their contracts will be finalised and they will leave the organisation to take up the next contract. Dealing with excess project material. This can mean dealing with the materials and equipment that are lying around after a project is finished. For example, after completing a building, there will be piles of bricks, sand, roof tiles, offcuts of wood, bags of cement and so on, unless people have stolen them to build their own houses with. All this needs to be dealt with. Some can be returned to stock. Machines can be returned to the store or returned to the hire company, and materials that can't be reused or recycled must be cleared away. Reallocating project facilities, equipment and other resources, and elaborating the final project reports as required by organisational policies. Activities related to the completion of the contractual agreements applicable to the project or project phase, such as confirming the formal acceptance of the seller's work. If the work is not up to the agreed standard, the seller should bring it up to the standard. But this is often a contentious issue with the seller trying to charge for WeWork as an enhancement. This is where you need to be as clear as possible in the scope and quality requirements, but you can't think of everything. For example, on a project I was managing to produce a new financial system, one of the required functions of the system was to pay contractors at the end of each month for the work they'd done during the month. Quite a simple requirement, and we thought that was covered in the scope statement. We tested the module a number of times. There were some bugs discovered, but the developer fixed them. But on a full-scale test of the whole system, I discovered if a contractor had no billable hours for the month, the system would process a payment for $0 and attempt to make a $0 payment to them. I reported this to the appropriate developer as an obvious bug. His response was, "It's an enhancement. You did not specify, you did not want the system to make $0 payments if no work can performed." So never assume common sense applies to contractors. The next activity is finalising open claims. This is where you've made claims against a provider for work that you believe is substandard, but the provider is arguing the case. Or it could be penalties built into the contract have been triggered. For example, there may have been a penalty in the contract if the provider fails to meet certain milestones. But I found in practice that penalty clauses seldom work, and trying to argue them can cause the provider to stop work, and if it goes to court, you will pay the lawyer more than the provider owes you anyway. Updating records to reflect final results and archiving such information for future use, as well as being a sensible thing to do. Most countries have laws, certainly Australia has, to ensure that business records are retained and securely stored. We are examining the activities necessary for administrative closure on the project phase, and these would also include activities needed for collect project or phase records, audit project success or failure, manage knowledge sharing and transfer, identify lessons learned, and please note that you should be recording lessons learned as they are learned rather than wait until the end, because you'll have forgotten them, or the contractor who knew all this knowledge will leave and you won't be able to get it back. Archive project information for future use by the organisation. Actions and activities necessary to transfer the project's products, services or results to the next phase or the production and or its deliverables. And again, we talk about phase. This is a mini project inside the major project. The whole point of a project is to create a new product, service or result, but that means that you have to hand them over. In most projects, deliverables will be completed and handed over throughout the entire project rather than doing it one big hit at the end. The one hit problem is that you may discover a serious, previously undetected fault in the dying stages of the project, and everyone's already left and you've signed everything off, and somehow you've got to fix this problem, and that's a very, very bad time to discover a serious fault. Collecting any suggestions for improving or updating the policies and procedures of the organisation and sending them to the appropriate organisational unit. This will probably overlap with recording lessons learned. Remember to be as specific and focused as possible. Use metrics where possible, because if you can't measure it, you can't tell if it's been improved or not. Measuring stakeholder satisfaction. The closed project or phase process also establishes the procedures to investigate and document the reasons for actions taken if a project is terminated before completion. In order to successfully achieve this, the project manager needs to engage all the proper stakeholders in the process. My preferred way to do this is by questionnaire and survey. And no, the questionnaire and survey don't mean the same thing. A questionnaire is the question and answer sheet, and a survey is the tool for analysing the results that come back from the questionnaire, and you might see that one on the examination. Closed project or phase inputs. Number one is the project charter. The project charter documents the project success criteria, the approval requirements, and who will sign off the project. My tip is specify the office rather than the person. Closed project or phase inputs. Number one, the project charter. The project charter documents the project success criteria, the approval requirements, and who will sign off on the project. My tip here is specify the office rather than the individual person. For example, this document to be approved by the area financial controller rather than this document must be approved by Ephraim Zimmerblatt Jr. because in a number of months' times Ephraim may have left, changed position or gone on leave. As I mentioned earlier, the problem with common sense in projects is it is not very common. People are worried that they may be replaced one day by artificial intelligence and machine learning, but the truth of the matter is a few of them could be replaced by a few lines of code in one program. Avoid the hassle, specify the office rather than the person. Number two, project management plan. All components of the project management plan are an input to this process. Project documents. Project documents are used on the project but are not considered part of the project management plan. They could include the assumption log. This records all the assumptions and constraints that guided the technical specifications, estimates, schedule, risks, etc. Assumptions are what you believe to be true for the duration of the project, and constraints are what you believe to be limiting your ability to manage a project. I guess now is the time to find out if you're right. My advice is to maintain a record of the advice for your belief in the assumptions and constraints, because if the project goes badly and the blame game starts, the blame game will start with the assumptions and the constraints, then the risk register, and it'll move on to the basis of estimates. These documents will be your first line of defence. But if the records indicate that you're to blame for the failure, shredding the records has been proved not to be a good option. Basis of estimates. The basis of estimates is used to evaluate how the estimation of duration, cost, resources and cost control compared to the actual results. The same note for assumptions and constraints. Keep a careful record of where these came from. The change log. This records the status of all change requests throughout the project or phase. You should have been doing a regular audit of this, but this is your last chance to check that nothing has slipped through the cracks. Issue log. Again, do a final check to make sure that all issues have been dealt with. Lessons learned register. The team theoretically will have been recording lessons learned throughout the project, and so this is really a final edit to remove all the junk, printing out the 10 versions of the same problem recorded by 10 different people, or 10 versions of the same problem recorded by the same person who has some issues, to make it suitable for transferring to the lessons learned repository. Milestone list. The milestone list shows the final dates on which the project milestones have been accomplished. Project communications. Project communications include any and all communications that have been created throughout the project. Quality control measures. They document the results of control quality activities and demonstrate compliance with quality requirements. Quality reports. The information presented in the quality report may include all quality assurance issues managed or escalated by the team, recommendations for improvement, and a summary of findings from the control quality process. Requirements documentation. Requirements documentation is used to demonstrate compliance with the project scope. The risk register. It provides information on risks that have occurred throughout the project. The risk report provides information on the risk status and is used to check that there are no open risks at the end of the project. Number 4, accepted deliverables. Accepted deliverables may include approved product specifications, delivery receipts and work performance documents. Partial or interim deliverables may also be included for phased or cancelled projects. Number 5, business documents. What are business documents? They're the documents created outside the project which result in a project being initiated. The project manager uses them but does not update them. So please remember that for the examination, the project manager uses the business documents but does not update them. So what are these business documents? Number 1, the business case. The business case documents the business need and the cost-benefit analysis that justifies the project. And now is the stage to check, was that justification valid? Benefits management plan. This plan outlines the target benefits of the project. This will also be used to determine when to confirm when the benefits are to be verified as achieved. For example, it may be 6 months, it may be a year after the project finishes before you can actually harvest all the benefits, so you have to have that gap in between. It will also list who will check them and the criteria to be used. And as I mentioned before, when it says who, I prefer to use an office rather than a person, just in case that person's left the company and no one knows what to do or doesn't bother doing the work. Number 6, agreements. In this case, agreements means the contracts largely that were issued for the project and recorded in the procurement management plan. User requirements for formal procurement closure are included in the procurement management plan and can be checked against the terms and conditions of the contracts or the agreements. Number 8, procurement documentation. To close the contract, all procurement documentation is collected, indexed and filed. Organizational process assets. The organizational process assets that can influence the close project or phase process include project or phase closure guidelines or requirements, for example, lessons learned, final project audits, project evaluations, project validations, acceptance criteria, contract closure, resource reassignment, team performance appraisals and knowledge transfer. Configuration management knowledge base contains versions and baselines of all official organizational standards, policies, procedures in any project documents. Closed project phase tools and techniques. Number 1, can you guess what it is? Expert judgment. Well done. Expertise should be considered from individuals or groups with specialized knowledge or training in the following topics: management control, audit, legal and procurement, and legalization and regulations. Number 2, data analysis. Data analysis techniques that can be used in project closeout include document analysis. This is used to extract information to record on the lessons learned. Regression analysis. This technique analyzes the interrelationships between different project variables that contribute to the project outcomes to improve performance in future projects. Sometimes this can be combined with sensitivity analysis techniques, which involves re-examining the interrelationships whilst keeping a single variable constant throughout the analysis, then repeating for each variable to see which variable has the greatest impact. Trend analysis can be used to validate the models used in the organization and to implement adjustments for future projects. This is important because there is a tendency to blindly trust business models even if some weaknesses are beginning to show. The models need to be checked against reality and then adjusted or replaced. Variance control can be used to improve the metrics of the organization by comparing what was initially planned against the end result. Tool and technique number 3 is meetings. Meetings such as close-out reporting meetings, customer wrap-up meetings, lessons learned meetings, and celebration meetings may be used to confirm that the deliverables have been accepted, to validate the exit criteria have been met, to formalise the completion of the contracts, to evaluate the satisfaction of the stakeholders, to gather lessons learned, to transfer knowledge and information from the project, and to celebrate success. However, it has been my experience that a celebration meeting works best if it's held at a restaurant or a bar. Closeout project phase outputs. Number 1, project document updates. All project documents may be updated and marked as final versions as a result of the project closure and archived in the organization's record management system. Number 2, final product, service or result transition. A product, service or result once delivered by the project may be handed over to a different group or organization that will operate, maintain and support it throughout its life cycle. This output refers to the transition of the final product, service or result that the project was authorized to produce, or in the case of a phase closure, the intermediate product, service or result of that phase from one team to another. Number 3, final report. The final report provides a summary of the project performance. It can include information such as summary level descriptions of the project or phase, scope objectives and criteria used to evaluate the scope, and evidence that the completion criteria were met. Schedule objectives including whether the results achieved the benefits that your project was undertaken to address. If the benefits are not met at the closure of the project, indicate the degree to which they were achieved and estimate the future benefits realization. And that's important for the examination. Summary of how the final product, service or result achieved the business needs identified in the business plan. If the business needs are not met at the close of the project, indicate the degree to which they were achieved and the estimate for when the business needs will be met in the future. Summary of any risks or issues encountered on the project and how they were addressed. And that's from PMBOK Guide, page 127. Output number 4, Organizational Process Asset Updates. Organizational process assets that are updated include project documents, documentation resulting from the project's activities, for example, project management plan, scope, cost, schedule, project calendars, change management documentation. The project calendar records the time when resources will be or won't be available. It may be that the project is finishing earlier or more likely later than expected, and so the resource availability needs to be updated on the appropriate calendars because then they're used by other projects. Organizational and support documents. Often, especially in the case of information technology projects, the project team operates, supports and maintains a product or service. This is a time when the support documentation is handed over to the support department and responsibility for the operation is passed to the business. This is one of the reasons why you should close the project as soon as possible, otherwise your team will be kept busy supporting and operating the products long after they're required. And the costs for doing this are coming from your project budget. You need to get them shifted over to external support. Project or phase closure documents. These are formal documents and record completion of the project or phase and the transfer of the completed project or phase deliverables to others, such as the operations groups or the next phase. The project manager will review prior phase closure documentation, customer acceptance documentation from the validate scope process, and the agreements, if applicable, to ensure that all project requirements are completed prior to formalising the closure of the project. It could be a disaster if the project were formally closed and the team disbanded, only to discover that a deliverable or significant body of work was still outstanding, and trust me, this does happen. So basically what you have to do is get another project on the way just to complete this one. It doesn't do a project manager's career a lot of good. However, in the case that the project was failing and was closed prematurely, the formal documentation will record why the project was terminated and formalises the procedures for the transfer of the finished and unfinished deliverables of the cancelled project to others, as well as return to stock or sale of unused materials, or they may be passed to the customer depending upon what the agreement was. Lessons learned repository. Lessons learned and knowledge gained throughout the project were maintained in a lessons learned register, but the final edited version is now transferred to the lessons learned repository for use by further projects. That brings us to the end of the close project or phase, and it's also the end of the project initiation management module. The next module is project scope management. Please read the corresponding chapter in the PMBOK guide before watching the video.